The October night was a storm with a mind of its own. Rain pelted the earth in merciless sheets, drumming on the lonely stretch of Route 47 like 1,000 tiny fists. Headlights cut through the darkness, casting ghostly beams across the slick road until they flickered, dimmed, and then died with a reluctant sigh. Sarah Wellington's gleaming Mercedes slowed, coughed once as though offended by the weather, and gave up altogether. The engine let out a hiss, and a plume of steam rose like the angry breath of a dragon beneath the hood. Sarah gripped the wheel, her jaw tightening. "Perfect," she muttered bitterly, her voice sharp in the suffocating silence. For a woman who commanded boardrooms with a glance whose signature could tilt markets, the sudden stillness of this storm-lashed highway felt like mockery. She flicked her wrist to check her diamond-studded watch, as though time itself might bend in her favor. But time, like the storm, refused to obey. She opened the door and stepped out, her Chanel stilettos sinking instantly into cold puddles. The rain attacked without mercy, plastering her tailored suit to her body, her hair clinging to her face in damp strands. The CEO of Wellington Foods, known for her immaculate poise, looked suddenly fragile, a queen stripped of her crown in the middle of nowhere. Her gaze snapped to a flickering sign in the distance, its paint faded, its edges rusted by years of neglect. The words, though battered, remained just legible: Jackson Auto Repair, fair prices, honest work. With reluctance and a scowl that deepened with every step, Sarah made her way toward the garage. The small building hunched against the storm like a tired sentinel. Its peeling paint and sagging roof made her frown. Everything about it clashed with the polished glass towers of her world. She shoved the door open and the smell of motor oil and stale coffee rushed at her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some flickering as though they too were on their last breath. "Is anyone here?" she called out, impatience lacing her voice. From beneath a faded blue pickup truck, a man slid out slowly, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had once been white. He rose to his full height, shoulders broad, coveralls stained by years of labor. His face bore the lines of long days and sleepless nights, but his eyes, deep-set, steady, were kind. Sarah's gaze flickered over him with quick judgment, the way one measures the weight of a stranger in an instant. "Having trouble, ma'am?" His voice was warm, unhurried, as if the storm outside had no power here. "My car just died on me," Sarah snapped, shivering but refusing to let it show. "And I have a meeting in Chicago at 8 in the morning. This can't be happening." The man nodded, neither flustered nor impressed. "Let's take a look." He grabbed a toolbox, stepped into the rain without hesitation, and leaned over her Mercedes. Raindrops streamed down his shirt, soaking the fabric until it clung to his sturdy frame. Sarah hovered, scrolling through her phone, desperate to reconnect with the world that was slipping from her grasp. Minutes passed before he lowered the hood gently, not with the frustration of a failed attempt, but with the calm gravity of a man who had delivered bad news before. "Cooling systems shot, cracked radiator, water pumps done for. It won't be a quick fix." Her eyes narrowed. "How long?" 2, maybe 3 days. I'll need to order parts from out of town." The words struck her like a slap. She shook her head, water flinging from her hair. "Name your price. Double, triple, I don't care. Just get it done." The man lifted his gaze to hers, and in that look was something immovable. "Money won't make parts arrive faster. Some things only take time," Sarah left, her voice edged with disbelief. "Everything in this world can be bought, Mr. Jackson," he said simply. "Michael Jackson. Everything, Mr. Jackson." She folded her arms, her tone dripping with disdain. He smiled faintly, sadness in his eyes. "Not everything, Miss Wellington. Some things are far more precious than money." And there it was, the first time in years that someone had dared to tell Sarah Wellington no. Her lips parted to fire back, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, a sharp laugh escaped her, cold and defensive. She gestured toward the steaming hood, her voice dripping with mockery, meant to shield her own unease. "Well then, if you fix this engine, I'll marry you." The words hung between them, absurd against the hiss of rain. She meant them as a joke, a jab at the ridiculousness of his refusal. But Michael didn't laugh. He only stood there, steady as stone, his kind eyes unshaken, his silence more powerful than any retort. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt something she couldn't quite name, a flicker of uncertainty in the pit of her stomach, as if the storm had shifted not just the world outside, but the one within her. The storm had not eased by morning. Rain streaked the windows of the small garage, turning the glass into shifting veils of silver. Sarah sat in a wooden chair that creaked every time she shifted, her foot tapping impatiently against the concrete floor. Her phone buzzed with unanswered emails and frantic reminders. She scrolled, jaw tight, as if sheer determination could bend the world to her will. But no signal reached this little corner of Millbrook. It was as though the universe itself had conspired to cut her off. Michael emerged from the back carrying a mug of steaming coffee, the aroma filling the air with quiet warmth. He offered it without a word. Sarah stared at it for a moment, then took it reluctantly, the ceramic hot against her fingers. He said nothing, his calm presence both infuriating and unsettling. She wasn't used to silence from people who stood before her. Usually they stumbled over words, eager to please. This man simply waited. Finally, she broke the quiet. "So, can you at least patch it up enough to get me to Chicago by morning?" Her tone was sharper than she intended, the anxiety slipping through. Michael set down a bundle of parts manuals on the counter, his movement steady. "No, ma'am, a patch job won't hold. The radiator's cracked. If I push it, the engine could seize up completely. You'd be stranded on the interstate instead of here." Sarah let out a sharp breath, half laugh, half scoff. "Then what do you suggest I do? Cancel the meeting? Tell my board of directors I couldn't make it because some small-town mechanic told me my car needed 3 days?" Her voice rose, a blend of panic and contempt. Michael met her gaze without flinching. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "I suggest you wait. Order the parts, give it the time it needs. Safety comes before speed." She nearly choked on her coffee, slamming the mug onto the table. "Safety?" Her laugh was brittle. "Do you have any idea who I am? I don't have the luxury of waiting. I built an empire because I never wait. I move faster than everyone else, and that's why I'm on top. Safety and comfort, those are for people who can afford to lose." Michael leaned against the workbench, folding his arms, the faintest shadow of a smile on his lips. Not mocking, understanding in a way that unnerved her more than cruelty would have. "With all respect, Miss Wellington, you're wrong. Safety isn't for the weak. It's for the people who matter most. If you were my customer, I'd rather have you angry and safe in a motel than proud and broken down on the highway." The words stung because of their simplicity. Sarah was used to arguments about profit margins, power plays, and leverage. She wasn't used to hearing someone choose her safety over her money. It made her feel seen, and she hated it. "Everything has a price, Mr. Jackson," she snapped, clinging to the only truth she knew. "Everything." Michael shook his head slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes steady and calm. "Not everything. Some things can't be bought, some things are earned, and some are given freely." The room went still, the storm outside dimming into background noise. Sarah stared at him, her mouth opening, then closing again. No one ever spoke to her like this. Not her staff, not her board, not even her rivals. It was as if she'd stumbled into a different world, one that didn't care who she was or what she could buy. Her heart thudded, heavy with anger she couldn't quite direct. For the first time in years, Sarah Wellington had no leverage. She felt powerless, cornered not by chains or threats, but by a man's quiet refusal to bend. And yet, beneath the sting of her wounded pride, something stirred. A flicker of respect, or maybe it was fear, she couldn't tell. She rose sharply from her chair, gathering her soaked jacket from the rack. "Fine. If you won't fix it, I'll find someone who will." Michael didn't move to stop her. He only said gently, "You won't find anyone tonight. This town is small, and I'm the only mechanic within 30 miles. But if walking into the storm makes you feel better, go ahead. I'll be here when you're ready to let me do the job right." The rain howled as she opened the door, stepping into the downpour, fury burning hot in her chest. But as she turned back for one last look, she saw Michael kneeling to drape a blanket over his little girl, who had wandered sleepily from the back. His hand lingered on her small shoulders, his eyes soft with love. That sight pierced deeper than his words, because in that instant, Sarah realized that he wasn't just a man refusing her money. He was a father who knew exactly what truly mattered, and that was something no empire, no fortune, had ever taught her. The storm had softened by the time Sarah returned to the garage, though the rain still whispered steadily against the roof. She hesitated at the doorway, her pride urging her to turn back toward the inn Michael had mentioned, but something else, something quieter, drew her inside. The faint golden light spilling through the crack in the door felt warmer than the sterile glow of any luxury hotel she had ever stayed in. When she pushed the door open, she saw a scene that froze her in place. Michael was crouched beside a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, who stood in the middle of the garage in pink unicorn pajamas, her curls tumbling messily around her small face. She clutched a worn teddy bear that had clearly seen better days, its fur thinned from years of love, her wide eyes, curious and fearless, fixed on Sarah. "Daddy, is someone out there?" the girl asked softly, her voice like a bell cutting through the storm. Michael turned with a gentle smile. It's just a visitor, sweetheart. Let's get you back inside where it's warm. But the girl didn't move. She stepped forward instead, her gaze never leaving Sarah. Is she the lady with the broken car? Sarah almost laughed at the simplicity of the question, though it caught in her throat before it could escape. She nodded, suddenly feeling strangely small beneath the child's innocent inspection. Yes, that's me. The little girl beamed, holding her teddy tighter. Don't worry, my dad's the best mechanic in the whole world. He can fix anything. For the first time that long, difficult night, Sarah felt her lips curve into a reluctant smile. The conviction in the girl's voice was so pure, so unshakable, that it melted a fraction of the icy wall she kept around herself. Is that so? Sarah asked gently. Yes, the girl said, her eyes sparkling. And he makes the best hot cocoa, too. Whenever it rains like this, we sit by the window and drink cocoa and read fairy tales. Michael chuckled, shaking his head as he knelt to smooth his daughter's curls. Emma, it's late. You should be sleeping. But Emma's eyes never left Sarah's. She looks cold, Daddy. Maybe she needs cocoa. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the child's simple kindness. She glanced down at her drenched suit, the water still clinging uncomfortably to her skin. For years, she had fought to project an image of perfection, never out of control, never vulnerable. And now, in front of this child, she realized she looked exactly as she felt, tired, wet, and strangely lost. Michael looked back at Sarah, his expression unreadable, then spoke with quiet warmth. We've got a little extra. You're welcome to join us. Sarah hesitated, every instinct screaming that she didn't belong here, in this shabby garage with flickering lights and secondhand furniture. But something about Emma's hopeful gaze tugged at her chest. It was the kind of look she had never seen at home growing up, the kind of look that said, you matter just because you're here. With a small sigh, she gave in. Hot cocoa, huh? That does sound tempting. Emma squealed with delight and ran toward the back, her little feet pattering against the concrete floor. Daddy, hurry! She said yes! Michael straightened, his eyes softening as he gestured toward a worn wooden chair by the workbench. Make yourself comfortable. It won't take long. Sarah sat slowly, the chair creaking beneath her, her gaze drifting to the photographs pinned to the wall. She saw snapshots of Michael and Emma at a town fair, sitting on a picnic blanket by a lake, Emma grinning with chocolate smeared across her face while Michael laughed beside her. The images stirred something, foreign in Sarah, a pang of longing she didn't know how to name. When Emma returned, clutching 2 steaming mugs topped with tiny marshmallows, Sarah felt the weight in her chest lighten just a little. The girl handed her one with both hands, careful not to spill. Here, Daddy says cocoa makes everything better. Sarah accepted the mug, her throat tightening as she met the child's trusting eyes. She forced a smile, her voice softer than she expected. Thank you, Emma. It's beautiful. Emma beamed with pride, climbing onto a chair beside her, while Michael leaned against the counter, watching quietly. For the first time that night, Sarah felt warmth that had nothing to do with the cocoa in her hands. It came from the little girl's simple generosity, from the quiet strength of the man who raised her, and from the uncomfortable yet undeniable truth dawning in Sarah's mind. Money couldn't buy this. Influence couldn't summon it. This, love, trust, family, was something entirely different. And though she didn't want to admit it yet, Sarah realized that in the heart of a storm, a small-town mechanic and his little girl had already begun to change her life. The storm outside had faded to a steady drizzle, the rhythmic patter on the roof now more soothing than oppressive. Inside the garage, the air carried the faint aroma of cocoa and motor oil, a strangely comforting mixture. Sarah sat with the warm mug cradled between her hands, watching the marshmallows melt into swirls across the surface. Emma had curled up in a blanket, her teddy bear tucked safely against her chest, her eyelids heavy, but her spirit stubbornly refusing to sleep. For a long moment, Sarah simply observed. The flickering fluorescent light softened the edges of the room, casting Michael's rugged profile into relief. He was at the workbench, his strong hands carefully sorting tools back into their places, every movement unhurried, almost ritualistic. The man exuded a quiet steadiness, a strength that didn't need to be announced. It unsettled Sarah. She was used to people proving themselves through credentials, wealth, or sharp words. Michael proved himself in silence. She cleared her throat, breaking the quiet. So, your daughter says you're the best mechanic in the world. Michael glanced up, his lips curving into a faint smile. She tends to exaggerate. Emma's sleepy voice drifted from the corner. No, I don't. You really are the best. Sarah couldn't help the small laugh that slipped out, a sound that surprised even her. It had been a long time since she laughed without calculation. She turned her gaze back to Michael, She believes in you. That says more than any resume ever could. Michael's hands stilled. For a brief second, a shadow flickered across his face, but then he nodded. She's my whole world. Everything I do is for her. Something in his tone tugged at Sarah. She tilted her head, curiosity pushing through her defenses. And her mother? The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of an old wall clock. Michael finally set the wrench down and leaned against the workbench, his eyes fixed on the floor. She left when Emma was 2, said this town was too small, too suffocating. She wanted something bigger, brighter. I couldn't stop her. He drew a slow breath. So it's just been the two of us ever since. Sarah stared at him, caught off guard by the raw honesty in his words. There was no bitterness, only the quiet ache of someone who had carried the weight alone and chosen love over resentment. She swallowed hard, her voice softer than before. That must have been difficult. Michael shrugged, though his eyes betrayed the depth of the truth. Hardest thing I've ever faced. But when I looked at Emma, I knew I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. She needed me, and that was enough. Sarah felt something stir in her chest, an uncomfortable ache she hadn't expected. She looked down at her mug, remembering nights in her own childhood when her parents' chairs at the dining table were always empty, filled instead by cold silence and staff who drifted in and out like ghosts. She had told herself it didn't matter, that success would be her shield, her proof of worth. And yet, here in this worn little garage, she realized how hollow that shield really was. Without meaning to, she spoke. I grew up in a big house, too big. My parents worked constantly. I had everything, every toy, every lesson, every privilege, but I barely saw them. Most nights, I sat alone in a room that looked perfect in photographs but felt empty. Her voice faltered, and she caught herself, almost embarrassed by her own vulnerability. I suppose that's why I've spent my whole life chasing success. If I achieved enough, maybe it would fill the silence. Michael's gaze lifted to hers, steady and unjudging. Did it? The question hung in the air like a blade. Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced herself to answer. No, not really. For the first time in years, she felt exposed, not as a CEO, not as a figure of authority, but as a woman stripped bare of her armor. And in Michael's quiet presence, she realized he wasn't measuring her worth by her mistakes or her achievements. He was simply listening. Emma stirred, her small voice breaking the heaviness. Miss Sarah? Sarah turned, her chest tightening at the sight of the little girl's sleepy eyes peeking out from beneath the blanket. Yes, sweetheart? Emma yawned, her words soft and unguarded. Don't be sad. Daddy says if you wait long enough, good things always come. Sarah froze, her breath catching. Out of the mouth of a child came the very lesson she had fought against all her life. She blinked rapidly, swallowing the unexpected lump in her throat. Your daddy sounds very wise. Emma smiled faintly before drifting back into slumber. Sarah sat back, her gaze lingering on the girl, then shifting to Michael. In that dimly lit garage, surrounded by tools, photographs, and the sound of the rain easing into a gentle lull, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of peace. And though she didn't want to admit it yet, she knew this night was unraveling her carefully constructed low, if thread by thread, until there would be no going back. By dawn, the rain had turned into a fine mist, clinging to the air like breath on glass. The highway was quiet, wrapped in the heavy silence of a world not yet awake. Inside the garage, the hum of tools and the occasional clink of metal echoed in the background as Michael set about assessing the damage once more. Sarah, her phone finally catching a bar of signal, sat perched on the edge of her chair, fingers flying across the screen as she tried to salvage what she could of her crumbling schedule. She could already feel the storm brewing in Chicago. Missed calls from her assistant, dozens of urgent emails flagged red. The pressure mounted, squeezing her chest tighter with each vibration of her phone. It wasn't just a meeting, it was the meeting. Her board expected her to secure a merger that could redefine Wellington Foods. To miss it was unthinkable. When Michael stepped back into the office area, wiping his hands on a rag, she rose to meet him, her tone clipped. Mr. Jackson, I don't care how you do it. I need this car running by tonight. Even if you have to glue the radiator together, even if you have to pray over it, just make it drivable. I'll cover whatever liability you're worried about. Michael's brow furrowed, but his voice remained calm. Miss Wellington, patching that radiator would be like slapping a bandage on a broken bone. It'll hold for a moment maybe, but on the highway at 70 miles an hour? You'd risk the engine blowing up. You'd risk your life. Sarah let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Risk my life? My whole life is risk, Mr. Jackson. Do you know what happens if I don't show up tomorrow? Do you know how many livelihoods depend on me? 300 employees, entire families. If I miss this meeting, we lose investors, the company's value plummets, and everything I've built burns too. Oh, the ground. That's what's at stake, not some cracked radiator. Michael's eyes sharpened, though his tone never rose. And what happens if you push that car past its limit and it leaves you stranded in the middle of nowhere, or worse? Do those employees still have their leader then? Do those families still have their jobs when their CEO is lying broken on the side of a highway? The words landed like a blow, and for a moment, Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her this way. Most people either trembled or flattered when she raised her voice, but Michael stood steady, unmoved, as though her title carried no weight here. Her voice wavered as she snapped back, desperate to regain control. You don't understand the pressure I live under. You don't understand what it means to carry the weight of a corporation on your back. Michael stepped closer, his voice lower, but fierce with conviction. And you don't understand what it means to look into your child's eyes and know you're all they have. You think your meeting tomorrow is life or death, but to me, Emma is life or death. That's why I won't take shortcuts, not for her, not for anyone. The garage fell silent, his words hanging in the air like smoke. Sarah's chest heaved with unspent fury, but beneath it lay something far more dangerous: doubt. For years, she had believed money could bend the world to her will. If the right figure was written on the check, doors opened, problems disappeared, obstacles dissolved. Yet here stood a man with grease-stained coveralls and a weary face who refused to be bought, who dared to place her safety above her wealth. Her fingers tightened around her phone until her knuckles whitened. "Don't you know who you're talking to?" she hissed, her pride desperate to claw its way back to the surface. "I'm Sarah Wellington. I can make or break anyone in Chicago. Are you sure you want to pick a fight with me?" Michael didn't flinch. His voice was steady, carrying neither fear nor anger. "I know exactly who you are, but in this garage, you're just a driver with a broken car, and I'm a mechanic who fixes engines the right way, or not at all." The defiance in his tone ignited her temper, but it was the quiet certainty in his eyes that unsettled her most. She had faced down rivals, lawyers, and billion-dollar tycoons, but never had she felt so powerless as she did before this small-town mechanic. Just then, a soft voice cut through the tension. "Daddy, why is she so angry?" Both turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her teddy bear dangling at her side, her face clouded with confusion. She looked from her father to Sarah, her wide eyes brimming with innocence. Michael crouched, smoothing her curls with a gentle hand. "I'm trying to help her, sweetheart. Sometimes people don't see it right away." The words pierced deeper than Sarah expected, shame tightening her chest. Even a child could see how her anger seemed out of place in this world of simple kindness. For a moment she wanted to explain herself to Emma, to say that she wasn't angry at them, but at her own helplessness. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she turned on her heel and strode toward the door, the storm inside her louder than the drizzle outside. Yet as she reached for the handle, she caught sight of Michael's hand resting protectively on Emma's small shoulder, his gaze soft with love. And something inside her cracked. Because in that fragile moment, Sarah realized this man wasn't defying her out of stubbornness. He was defying her because love, pure, selfless love, was stronger than fear, stronger than money, stronger than her power, and it terrified her. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the town wrapped in the kind of quiet only small places know. Street lamps flickered to life along Millbrook's main road, their light bending in puddles that mirrored the fading blush of the sunset. Sarah walked beside Michael and Emma, her heels clicking against the cracked sidewalk, a sound that felt almost out of place here. She had agreed, reluctantly, she told herself, to join them at Maggie's diner. A hot meal, Michael had said, would do her good while she waited for the parts to arrive. The diner sat on the corner, a small white building with flower boxes still clinging to the last blooms of autumn. A neon sign buzzed faintly above the door. Inside, the air smelled of butter and coffee, of warm bread and sizzling bacon. The booths were patched but clean, the kind of place where regulars carved their initials into the wood decades ago, and the grooves still whispered their stories. Mrs. Maggie herself bustled from behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour, her smile wide and genuine. "Michael Jackson! And Emma! And—" Her eyes landed on Sarah, her expression softening with polite curiosity. "A new friend tonight?" Michael nodded. "Her car broke down on Route 47, thought she could use some company." "Then you've come to the right place, sweetheart," Maggie said warmly, ushering Sarah to a booth near the window. "Here we don't let anyone sit alone." Sarah tried to smile back, though it felt foreign on her lips. She slid into the booth across from Michael while Emma scrambled beside her father, chattering about apple pie and grilled cheese. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. The atmosphere was simple but comforting, the low hum of conversation from locals blending with the clink of dishes. She glanced around, farmers with weather-worn faces, young couples sharing milkshakes, a group of teenagers laughing over fries. No one stared at her here. No one measured her by her clothes or her reputation. For the first time in years, she felt invisible. And strangely, it was a relief. Plates arrived quickly. Grilled cheese sandwiches, golden and crisp, bowls of steaming tomato soup, and a slice of apple pie so fragrant Sarah felt her stomach tighten with hunger. She picked up her fork, almost startled at how delicious the first bite tasted. It was simple, yet it carried a warmth that no Michelin star restaurant had ever given her. But just as Sarah began to settle into the small comfort of the meal, the door swung open with a sharp chime. Cold air rushed in, and with it came a figure who seemed utterly misplaced in this little diner. A tall man in a tailored suit, his polished shoes glistening with rainwater, stepped inside. His gaze swept the room with thinly veiled contempt before settling on Sarah. Her blood ran cold. Richard Harris. He strode across the diner without hesitation, his lips twisting into a mocking half-smile. Well, isn't this a surprise? He didn't ask before sliding into the booth beside Sarah, his presence sharp and invasive. The mighty CEO of Wellington Foods, hiding out in a backwater diner. What will the board say? Michael's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively resting on the table near Emma, a subtle but protective gesture. Emma leaned closer to her father, her small face folding with unease. Sarah straightened, summoning every ounce of composure she had left. Richard, what are you doing here? Richard's smile deepened, venom curling beneath it. I came to deliver a message. Your absence hasn't gone unnoticed. You missed a critical meeting. The board is restless, the stock is already dipping, and whispers are spreading. Do you realize what kind of storm you've created? Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced her voice to remain calm. I was stranded. There was nothing I could do. Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous purr. There's always something you could do, but instead I find you here, sipping soup with... His eyes flicked to Michael, lingering with disdain. Locals. The insult hung heavy in the air. Michael's eyes darkened, though he stayed silent, his hand tightening protectively around Emma's small one. Sarah felt her heart pound, anger rising like fire in her chest. For years, she had tolerated Richard's arrogance in the boardroom, his constant power plays, his thinly veiled attempts to undermine her. But tonight, watching him sneer at Michael, at Emma, at this town that had shown her more humanity in 2 days than Richard had in years, something inside her snapped. Enough, she said, her voice sharp, cold as steel. Richard blinked, caught off guard by her tone. You will not come into this place and insult people who've shown me nothing but kindness, Sarah continued, her eyes blazing. You think power makes you strong, Richard? It doesn't. Dignity does, decency does, and that's something you'll never understand. The diner had fallen quiet, every eye turned toward them. Richard laughed harshly, though his voice cracked at the edges. Defending a mechanic, Sarah? You've truly lost your mind. Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady, her words cutting. No, Richard. For the first time in years, I found it. For a moment, silence reigned. Richard's face twisted with rage, but Sarah didn't flinch. She sat straighter, her hands steady on the table, her resolve unshakable. For the first time, she wasn't fighting for profits or power. She was fighting for respect, for truth, for the quiet dignity she had witnessed in Michael and Emma. The storm outside might have passed, but inside that little diner, another one had just begun. The train of consequences followed Sarah back to Chicago like an unforgiving shadow. The next morning, as the skyline sharpened against a gray sky, she felt her pulse quicken with every mile closer to Wellington Foods headquarters. The memory of Richard's sneer in the diner burned in her mind, his words dripping with disdain, his warning as sharp as a knife. The board will make you pay. Her car pulled into the underground garage, and for the first time in years, Sarah hesitated before stepping into the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected a woman who looked immaculate in her tailored suit, but beneath the flawless surface, her heart thundered like the storm she had just left behind. By the time the elevator doors slid open to the top floor, her composure had hardened again, though her stomach churned with dread. The boardroom was already full when she entered. The long mahogany table gleamed beneath the cold light, surrounded by sharp suits and colder expressions. Every eye turned toward her. Some were weary, others openly skeptical. and at the head of the table sat Richard Harris, his smirk waiting like a trap. "Welcome back, Sarah," he said smoothly, his voice carrying across the room. "I trust your detour was worth it." Murmurs rippled through the room. Sarah set her briefcase down and straightened her shoulders, forcing her voice to remain calm. "My car broke down. I handled what I could remotely." Richard let out a laugh that echoed too loudly in the still room. "Handled what you could? The merger deal is slipping through our fingers. Investors are nervous. Our stock dropped 5% in 2 days. Do you call that handling it?" Another board member, David Hamilton, usually her ally, shifted uncomfortably before speaking. "Sarah, we've always respected your commitment, but this time, it does seem like you let personal matters interfere with business. That isn't acceptable for a leader of your position." Each word landed like a stone in her chest. She had known this battle was coming, but hearing the disappointment in David's tone twisted the knife deeper. She clasped her hands together beneath the table to hide their trembling. Richard leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Perhaps it's time we face the truth. Leadership requires focus, ruthlessness when necessary. You seem distracted, softened even. If you can't strike the right balance, perhaps someone else should lead." The room grew heavy, the silence suffocating. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to fight back with cold logic, to remind them of her years of victories, her empire built from nothing but sheer will. But another voice rose within her, the echo of Michael's steady conviction, of Emma's innocent words. "Don't be sad. Daddy says, if you wait long enough, good things always come." Sarah drew in a long, steady breath. When she spoke, her voice was not the clipped command they expected. It was calm, resonant, and startlingly sincere. "You're right about one thing, Richard. I have changed." Richard's smirk faltered, confusion flashing across his features. "I've spent years chasing success as if it were the only measure of life. But in the past few days I realized that success without humanity is nothing. It's empty. We build profits, yes, but what good is profit if we lose our integrity, if we forget the communities that depend on us, if we forget that people, not numbers, are the heart of this company?" The board shifted uneasily. Some eyes softened, others hardened, but all were listening. Richard slammed his palm against the table, his mask cracking. "Idealistic nonsense. We're not here to play charity. We're here to deliver results to shareholders, and if you can't do that, Sarah, then you've proven you're no longer fit to lead." Her chest tightened, fear clawing at the edges of her resolve. She could see the tide turning against her, the whispers, the calculating glances. She could lose everything in this room. Yet strangely, she felt steadier than she had in years, because she knew what she was standing for, and it was worth the more than any title. She rose slowly, placing her palms on the table. Her eyes swept over every face, meeting them one by one. "If this board believes I no longer fit to lead, then I will accept that. But understand this, profits alone will not sustain us. The world is changing, and people care about more than numbers on a chart. They care about values, responsibility, trust. If we ignore that, we won't just lose our humanity, we'll lose our future." A hush fell over the room. Richard's jaw tightened, his fury barely contained, but his words seemed to die in his throat. The others exchanged glances, conflicted, some leaning toward him, others toward her. And in that silence, Sarah realized something profound. For the first time, she wasn't speaking to protect her position. She was speaking because it was the truth. Whether they stripped her of the CEO title or not, she had already won the battle that mattered most, the battle within herself. The boardroom remained silent, the air thick with tension, the weight of Sarah's words still vibrating in the polished wood of the long mahogany table. Every eye was locked on her, some wavering with doubt, others sharpening with suspicion. And at the far end, Richard's smirk returned, thin and poisonous, like a snake waiting to strike. "Well," he said at last, his voice carrying a false lightness. "That was very moving, Sarah, truly. But we don't run this company on feelings, we run it on results, and your absence, your distraction, your sudden change of heart, it has cost us dearly. I think it's time we hold a vote of confidence." He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, daring her to protest. For a moment, fear coiled tight in her stomach. This was her empire, her name, her life's work. Everything she had sacrificed, the nights alone in glass towers, the years of clawing her way up, the endless hours proving herself in a world that expected her to fail, stood on the brink of being taken away. But then, unbidden, an image rose in her mind. Emma's sleepy face as she whispered, "Don't be sad." Michael's steady voice saying, "Some things can't be bought. Some things are far more precious than money." And suddenly the fear fell away. Sarah straightened, her voice calm, almost gentle. No, Richard. There will be no vote. The board shifted, murmurs breaking the silence. Richard's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing. What do you mean, no vote? She reached for her briefcase, pulled out a slim folder and placed it squarely on the table. Because I'm stepping down, effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Wellington Foods. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed, papers rustled. One board member rose halfway out of his chair, stunned. Richard's smirk vanished, his face blanching with disbelief. You can't be serious, he hissed. You're walking away just like that? Sarah's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of defeat, but of liberation. Not walking away, walking towards something better. She pushed the folder across the table. These are the contracts. I'm purchasing the entire Midwest division at market price, with my own money. It will operate independently under my leadership, with a new model built on sustainability, responsibility, and community investment. Not profit at any cost, but a business with a soul. Shock rippled through the room. The board members flipped through the documents, their disbelief plain. Richard shot to his feet, his voice sharp, trembling with rage. This is madness. You can't just dismantle this company for some small-town experiment. Sarah held his gaze unflinching. It's not an experiment, it's the future. And while you scramble to squeeze every last penny out of soulless strategies, I'll be building something real, something people will believe in. And when that happens, Richard, this bore, and we'll see which path truly has value. His fists clenched at his sides, his mask slipping into fury. You're undermining everything we've built. No, she said softly, her voice carrying more power than his fury ever could. I'm saving what matters, because what we've built is hollow, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life chasing ghosts. The room descended into chaos, voices rising, arguments clashing, papers sliding across the table, but Sarah no longer felt the weight of their judgment. For the first time in years, her chest felt light, her heart steady. She gathered her things with grace, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. At the door, she paused, turning back one last time. You called me weak, Richard, she said, her eyes like ice. But it takes more strength to walk away from emptiness than to cling to it. Remember that. And with that, she left. The elevator ride down was silent, but her reflection in the mirrored walls no longer seemed cold or hollow. She saw a woman transformed, still powerful, but no longer chained to the illusions of power. She was walking away from the empire she had built, yes, but she was walking towards something far greater, authenticity, purpose, and a life she had never dared imagine possible. By the time she stepped out into the Chicago streets, the sky had cleared. For the first time in years, Sarah Wellington breathed without feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The road back to Millbrook stretched out before Sarah like a ribbon of quiet redemption. She had left Chicago behind with the echoes of boardroom chaos still ringing in her ears, but her heart was calm. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing toward another meeting, another conquest, another mountain to climb. She was going home, or at least to the place that had begun to feel like one. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of leaves turning gold and the faint smoke of fireplaces awakening for the season. As she drove into the small town, the glass towers of the city faded from memory, replaced by the humble charm of brick buildings, painted shop fronts, and streets lined with trees glowing in shades of amber and crimson. It felt impossibly far from the cutthroat world she had just abandoned, and yet everything about it felt right. Her Mercedes slowed as she turned onto the narrow lane near Michael's garage, and then she saw them. Michael stood with Emma at his side, waiting just beyond the fence. The little girl's curls bounced as she jumped up and down, waving with all the energy her small frame could muster. Michael's smile was steady, wide, and warm, the kind of smile that could melt the coldest night. Sarah pulled to a stop and stepped out. Before she could take 2 steps, Emma tore across the yard and flung herself into her arms. "Miss Sarah," she cried, her small voice bubbling with joy. "I knew you'd come back. Daddy said you would, and I believed him." Sarah knelt, hugging the child tightly, overcome by the sweetness of the embrace. For all the boardrooms she had commanded, for all the accolades and praise she had collected, nothing had ever filled her with the same warmth as this tiny girl's trust. Tears pricked her eyes as Emma whispered, "Please don't leave again." "I won't," Sarah said, her voice trembling but sure. "Not this time." When she rose, her eyes met Michael's. For a long moment they said nothing, but the silence was heavy with meaning. Gratitude, respect, and something deeper, something unspoken, yet undeniable, flashed between them. "Welcome home, Sarah," Michael said at last, his voice steady but thick with emotion. She smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't felt in years. It feels like it. And then she noticed them, figures stepping out from behind the garage, from across the street, from the diner down the road. Dozens of townspeople gathering, their faces glowing with warmth and pride. Above them, twinkling string lights had been hung between posts, fluttering balloons bobbed gently in the breeze, and a large handmade sign stretched across the street. "Welcome home, Sarah." She stopped in her tracks, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. Never in her life had she been greeted like this. Not at awards ceremonies, not at shareholder galas, not even at the pinnacle of her career. Those moments had been about her title, her success, her image. This was about her. Simply her. Mrs. Maggie stepped forward, her hands dusted with flour as always, her eyes brimming with affection. She clasped Sarah's hand gently. "Dear, we heard about what you did in Chicago. We're proud of you. We wanted you to know this town is yours too. You belong here." Sarah's throat tightened, words escaping her in a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." An elderly man stepped forward, Mr. Peterson, who ran the hardware store. His voice was rough but kind. "You've already done it. You gave this town a future when you chose us over everything else. That's more than thanks. It's love." Sarah's vision blurred with tears, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She turned back to Michael, who was watching her with that steady, grounding gaze. He stepped closer, speaking softly, only for her to hear. "This is what you fought for, Sarah. Not the boardroom, not the titles. This." He gestured to the people, the lights, the little girl still clutching her hand. "A life where you're never alone." The lump in her throat swelled, and she could only nod. Because for the first time in her life, she finally understood what home truly meant. It wasn't walls or wealth or power. It was belonging. It was family. As laughter and music began to ripple through the gathering, Sarah realized she was no longer a visitor in Millbrook. She was one of them, and for the first time she wasn't running toward success. She was standing still, in the only place she had ever truly wanted to be. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Sarah had ever known. Instead of conference calls and skyscraper boardrooms, her days filled with the hum of small-town life, walking past the diner where Mrs. Maggie always saved her a slice of pie, stopping by the school to watch Emma proudly show her drawings, visiting the garage where Michael worked with quiet devotion. The air felt lighter here, free of the invisible chains that had always bound her to ambition. Yet one evening stood apart from the rest. Michael had stopped by her rented cottage just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the sky in strokes of amber and violet. Emma skipped ahead of them, chasing fireflies with her teddy tucked under her arm. Michael had been quieter than usual, his hands in his pockets, his gaze thoughtful. "Come on," he said suddenly, his voice carrying both a hint of excitement and nerves. "There's somewhere I'd like to show you." Sarah tilted her head, curiosity rising. "Where to?" "You'll see." They walked down a leaf-strewn path, the air cool with the crispness of fall. The sound of water reached them first, soft and steady, and then the trees opened up to reveal a hidden lake, its surface shimmering with reflections of the twilight sky. But it wasn't the lake that stole Sarah's breath. Hundreds of tiny lights glowed in the trees and along the shore, strung up carefully, their soft radiance turning the scene into something magical. Lanterns floated gently on the water, each one glowing like a star fallen to earth. Sarah stopped in her tracks, her heart fluttering in her chest. "Michael, what is this?" Michael smiled, though she could see the nervousness in the way he shifted his weight. "A place I've been working on. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere special. I thought you should see it." Emma came running back, her small face lit by the glow of the lanterns. "Do you like it, Miss Sarah? Daddy made it pretty just for tonight." Sarah pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. "It's beautiful. Truly." Michael took a slow breath, then stepped closer. His eyes, steady as always, held something new now, something vulnerable. "Sarah, when you walked into my garage that night, I thought it was just another storm, another stranger needing help. I never imagined you'd change everything, for me, for Emma, for this whole town." His voice wavered, but he pressed on. "You brought hope where I thought there was none. You gave Emma a smile I hadn't seen in years, and you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but the words caught in her chest. Michael reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, carefully wrapped box. He knelt before her, the soft glow of lantern light catching in his eyes. When he opened it, a delicate ring sparkled inside, simple but elegant, its meaning far richer than its cost. Sarah Wellington, he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. Will you marry me? Will you become Emma's mother and build a life with us here, where love matters more than power, more than money, more than anything else? The world stilled. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the lake, the faint whisper of leaves, and Emma's quiet gasp of joy as she clapped her hands. Say yes, Miss Sarah. Please say yes. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, her heart surging with a warmth she had never known. She looked at Michael, this man who had refused her money, who had shown her a strength born not of power but of love. She looked at Emma, her innocent eyes shining with hope, and for the first time in her life, the answer was easy. Yes, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking into a laugh of joy. She placed her hand over his, her eyes glowing through the tears. Yes, Michael, I'll marry you. I'll be Emma's mother. I'll build this life with you. The moment she spoke, the town seemed to erupt around them. From the trees, figures emerged, neighbors, friends, familiar faces, cheering and clapping, their smiles lit by the lanterns. The whole town had come, waiting in the shadows to witness the moment. Emma threw herself into Sarah's arms, crying out with delight. I knew it. I knew you'd stay forever. I finally have a mama. Michael rose, slipping the ring gently onto Sarah's finger before pulling her close. And as lanterns drifted higher into the night sky, Sarah realized she had not only said yes to Michael and Emma, she had said yes to love, to belonging, to a life richer than any fortune she had ever chased. For the first time, she wasn't the CEO, the woman of icy composure, the untouchable power. She was simply Sarah, loved, needed, and home. The morning of the wedding dawned with a stillness that felt almost holy. The sky above Millbrook glowed with a soft gold, the kidin, and of light that seemed to promise new beginnings. The little church at the edge of town had been transformed overnight. White blossoms trailed along the wooden pews, ribbons fluttered gently from the windows, and lanterns lined the aisle, their warm glow matching the joy in every heart gathered there. Inside a small room off the chapel, Sarah stood before a mirror. For a long moment, she hardly recognized herself. The woman reflected back wasn't the armored CEO, draped in steel gray power suits and sharp edges. Instead, she wore a simple, elegant gown that hugged her frame with grace. Her hair fell in soft curls, a veil resting lightly above her shoulders. Her eyes glistened, not with calculation or control, but with genuine happiness. Mrs. Maggie adjusted the veil with tender care. Darling, she whispered, her voice rich with emotion, you've never looked more beautiful. Not because of the dress, but because of the love shining out of you. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she reached for Maggie's hand. Thank you for everything, for welcoming me, for reminding me what family feels like. I never thought I'd find a home here. Maggie smiled, brushing away a tear of her own. Millbrook has always been waiting for you, Sarah, and so has he. At the sound of soft music drifting from the chapel, Sarah's heart leapt. It was time. The doors opened and she stepped into the aisle. The townspeople, all dressed in their best, rose to their feet, faces beaming with pride and joy. Every step Sarah took seemed to echo with years of loneliness falling away, replaced by the steady drumbeat of belonging. She caught sight of Emma at the front, clutching her flower basket, her little face glowing with excitement, and then her eyes found Michael. He stood waiting, dressed in a simple black suit, his broad shoulders straight, his gaze steady and tender, but it was his eyes that undid her. The way they held her as if she was the only person in the world, as if every trial and storm had led to this exact moment. When she reached him, he whispered, "At last." Her lips curved into a trembling smile. At last. The minister's voice rose, solemn yet gentle, guiding them through the vows. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he held hers, his deep voice thick with emotion as he promised to love, protect, and cherish her and Emma for the rest of his days. Sarah's own voice broke as she vowed the same, not just to Michael, but to the little girl beaming beside them. When the ring slid onto her finger, Sarah felt its weight not as gold, but as promise. And then, before the minister could speak the final blessing, Emma stepped forward. She clutched her teddy bear in one hand, her small face glowing with tears and joy. Her voice rang out pure and unguarded, filling the hushed church. I'm so happy today, because I finally have a mama. From now on, we'll always be a family. Forever. The congregation gasped softly, many brushing at their eyes. Sarah dropped to her knees, gathering Emma into her arms, sobs of joy shaking her shoulders. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered through tears. I love you more than anything. And yes, we're a family, forever. When she rose again, Michael's eyes glistened as he kissed her hand. The minister declared them husband and wife, and as their lips met, the church erupted into applause and cheers. Bells rang out, mingling with laughter, as if the entire town rejoiced together. Outside, under a sky now awash with pink and gold, the reception filled the town square. Long tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, music drifted through the cool air, and lanterns lit the evening as children danced and played. Sarah looked around, her heart overflowing. For once, she wasn't the powerful CEO standing above a crowd. She was a wife, a mother, a friend, woven into the fabric of a community that had embraced her as one of their own. Michael slipped his arms around her from behind, his lips brushing her ear. "You know," he murmured, "you once joked you'd marry me if I fixed your engine. I never thought I'd hold you to it." Sarah laughed through her tears, leaning back into his embrace. "It turns out, Michael, you didn't just fix my engine, you fixed my life." Emma ran up then, tugging at their hands, her little voice rising above the music. "Come on, Mama, Daddy, dance with me." And under the lantern-lit sky, the three of them stepped onto the square together, hand in hand, surrounded by laughter, love, and a town that had become their family. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, imprinting the memory deep within her soul. For the first time, she understood the fullness of joy, not in wealth, not in power, but in love, freely given and shared. And as she twirled with Michael and Emma beneath the stars, Sarah knew her story was no longer about climbing to the top of the world. It was about finally finding the place where her heart could rest forever. The morning after the wedding dawned clear and golden, as if the world itself had chosen to bless their new beginning. The square was quiet now, only faint echoes of last night's laughter drifting through the streets. Sarah stood on the porch of her new home, the small, lovingly restored cottage on the edge of Millbrook she now shared with Michael and Emma. She cradled a steaming cup of coffee, her wedding ring catching the early light. For the first time in decades, she felt no need to rush, no agenda waiting, no endless meetings stacked back to back. Just the sound of Emma giggling inside as Michael helped her make pancakes, their voices weaving together in the simplest, most beautiful harmony Sarah had ever known. And yet, as serene as the moment felt, she knew the world beyond Millbrook hadn't forgotten her. By mid-morning, her phone buzzed with messages, her name still dominating headlines. Former CEO resigns, launches revolutionary model in Midwest division. Sarah Wellington's radical gamble. Is this the future of business? But instead of dread, Sarah felt only a quiet pride. She had walked away from the hollow empire she built and into something alive, something authentic. The division she purchased was already buzzing with energy. Local hires training at new facilities, small shops receiving investments, farmers signing contracts that promised fairness instead of exploitation. What had begun as a desperate stand in a boardroom had grown into a movement. Later that week, she returned to Chicago briefly to face the press. The conference hall brimmed with flashing cameras and skeptical faces, but Sarah stood at the podium calm and resolute. "I stepped down because I realized success without humanity is no success at all," she said, her voice steady, clear. "Wellington Midwest is proof that profit and compassion are not enemies. We can lift communities, honor families, and still thrive. I learned that truth not in a boardroom, but in a small town where I was a stranger and yet welcomed like family. That is the future I believe in, and it's the one we'll build together." The room had fallen silent. Even the harshest reporters found themselves scribbling furiously, not with cynicism, but with a dawning respect. Afterward, as she slipped away from the cameras, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished glass doors. She no longer saw the icy CEO with perfect posture and guarded eyes. She saw a woman softened by love, steadied by truth, and strengthened by community. For the first time in her life, she saw herself, whole and unafraid. Back in Millbrook that evening, Sarah was greeted not with questions or doubts, but with the laughter of townspeople gathered outside Maggie's diner, cheering as she returned. Emma ran into her arms, holding up a drawing she had made at school, 3 figures hand in hand under a bright sun, the words "my family" scribbled in crayon above. Michael came to her side, slipping an arm around her waist, his steady warmth grounding her. "See," he murmured, "this is what you fought for." Sarah kissed the top of Emma's curls, her voice thick with emotion. "No, Michael, this is what found me." As lanterns were lit again that night and the town filled with music and joy, Sarah realized something profound. Her life's greatest story hadn't been written in annual reports or shareholder speeches. It had been written here, in the small kindness of a mechanic who refused her money, in the innocence of a child who offered hot cocoa on a stormy night, in the courage to walk away from power and toward love. The final shocking truth, the revelation she never could have imagined, was that she hadn't been saved by her wealth or her brilliance. She had been saved by what she once dismissed as weakness, compassion, patience, community. As she held Michael's hand and spun with Emma under the glowing lights, Sarah Wellington finally understood. Power hadn't made her whole, love had. And in that moment, she knew her true story was just beginning, no longer the tale of a CEO conquering the world, but of a woman who had finally come home.